Hello, everyone. You may have heard that Breaking Through Glass Ceilings has recently partnered with Symphony of Balloons. Symphony of Balloons offers luxury balloons for your event as well as a 360 booth. So, if you're looking to save money, simply mention that you heard about this service on Breaking Through Glass Ceilings and you can save 10% on your order.
After the game, he wore purple this week, but he wore a purple suit after one of the games last week, and you know all the mainstream media was first thing they think about is Prince because that's all
Yep,
they know when it comes to purple, right?
exactly.
But none of them noticed he had a vest on. He had a suit vest on, and none of them noticed the the Omega symbol
Hmm.
on the back of his vest. So it took one reporter, because it's only a handful of us here. It took one deck reporter here. What's his name? EJ Smith, who works for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he mentioned Jalen Hurts has on his Omega, his Omega Phi Psi vest, and I piggybacked on that, and I tweeted above EJ, and I said, "Representation matters,"
Hmm.
because everybody else in that room would have missed it. And that's the
Absolutely.
difference.
Twitter is a beautiful place. And I'm excited that on today's episode, I get to have someone who we've been following each other's work for the past couple of years, and that is the one and only Mr. OJ Spivey. OJ is a writer for the Philadelphia Tribune, and he will be covering the Philadelphia Eagles this weekend in the Super Bowl. As a native of Philly, this is a dream. So we talk about that. He also shares how he broke into the business in a non-traditional way. So I'm very excited for y'all to hear this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, here's my conversation with OJ Spivey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on the line today, I got a guy who, one, I have to say, is a gentleman for even letting me get this podcast recorded as he's prepping for the big game, the Super Bowl, and that is the one and only Mr. OJ Spivey. OJ, how you doing today?
I'm good, Brian. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, man. Before we get into, your career and all the cool things you got going on, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm actually pretty excited, of course. There's nothing like your hometown team being a
Mm-hmm.
representative in the Super Bowl. So, I mean, everything's good. And, it keeps me busy as well. So, but yeah, it's an exciting time here in Philadelphia. And me being a native, I can't feel any better. Well,
Yeah.
I probably Super Bowl win and everything, as I try to keep it objective. But yeah, Super Bowl win, of course, would even be much better. So,
No, well, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's get right into it. When did you decide that you wanted to get involved in media?
well, with my journey, I'm kind of a late bloomer. I've always growing up and everything here in Philadelphia. I've always had an interest in sports, culture. You combine that with a curious mind, but I really didn't pursue this journey, this career, until I got into my 30s. We kind of really started in my late 20s and everything, um, as any guy does. You work in corporate America, everything, you get a little stagnant. You say, okay, well, is this all that life has to offer? So what I did was, and without me being a college grad, I said, okay, what type of path could I take to kind of break into this industry and step into this industry? And
Mhm.
thankfully, there was a broadcast school here in this area where I could go to, but it was expensive. But thankfully, they had a scholarship, which I was able to win. $10,000 scholarship, right? So I
Mhm.
was able to go to a local broadcast trade school, learn tricks of the trade, TV, radio, broadcasting, journalism, everything out of a crash course. It doesn't take the place of a 4 year journalism or communications degree, but it was what I needed at the time. And the toughest thing wasn't that; it was just still trying to break into the industry. And at this point, I'm about 34 years old. Um, Had my daughter at the time. I mean, I'm still working full time and all, but I'm just trying to just break through this industry. Um, I tried going to local radio stations because that was my thought process, just going to the radio because more than anything else, I had a love of radio.
Okay.
Whether it was listening to DJs, listening to talk show hosts, newsmen and women, I wanted to just lend my voice or use my voice for radio. But I couldn't break in. I was just trying to break in and just do promotions on a weekend for, a radio station, just give out T-shirts or give out bumper stickers or something like that. But, no one would give me the time of day, which was cool. And then also understanding that most of those jobs are for interns and things of that nature. And
Mm-hmm.
then a couple years later, this cool thing was discovered, which is called, we call it all podcasting now, right? But this
Yep.
cool thing was discovered called internet radio, online radio. And a buddy of mine, here in Philly, he was already doing the show on, I think it was called Black Talk Radio back then. I think just about everybody was on there who started out podcasting. And he was doing just kind of like a little comedy show and everything. And he put me up to it. And, he knew my love of sports. He knew my love for statistics and numbers and records and different things like that. Not that I was a nerd, so to speak, but he said, you know what, why don't you get on this platform and, start your sports talk show? Because that was one of my goals, just being a sports talk show host.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, listening to um, guys on a big market like Philadelphia, and I would hear, all these guys be wrong about so many things, and something as simple as predicting the score. I said, you know what, I can be just as wrong as these guys and get paid for it. Why not me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, it's a white male dominated industry, still is today. We're kind of breaking through different things like that, but I went on and did the internet radio show. Actually found a co-host. Shout out to Diva D out of Atlanta. And, we kind of meshed together as co-hosts and we did our thing for about 3 years or so. And during that process, a buddy of mine who I coached Little League Baseball with, uh, he was actually on the radio doing a weekend talk show at one of the black stations here. And one day he called me up. He said he listened to my podcast and he called me up and said, "Hey, my co-host, why don't you come in and fill in for him one Saturday?" And I started filling in a couple weeks, and next thing you know, I was either a host or a co-host of a sports talk show here locally on WRD Radio, which is the only black talk station in the state of Pennsylvania. So, and with that, I wasn't getting paid, mind you, but I was just so happy to be on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
So I just used that to my advantage. And with that, and with using a name, I was able to get into different avenues. I was able to, break down some doors. Um, I started out covering before I started covering the Eagles, let's say this year. I started covering different events, like their community events. Um, like for instance, like one of their biggest charity events is called their Autism Challenge. Eagles chairman is very big on that. Or I would just go out and do anything connected to sports. If it was a community event, it was something where I knew players or coaches would be there. I would make my way. I would talk to the community relations PR people and say, "Hey, you mind if I cover this? I'm with WRD," and it just got me in different doors as I stepped along. And one thing I didn't uh, one thing I didn't think about really was writing along the
Okay.
time. And during my um, podcast, my initial podcast, I would have different guests on, and this is of course the advent of Twitter as well. And I would have different guests on, and one in particular. Um, this one reporter, she covered the Memphis Grizzlies down in Memphis for one of the local papers down there, and she has since moved on to ESPN. And at that time, they were starting the Undefeated, which is Anscape now. And she contacted me one Saturday morning and said, "Hey," and this is 2016, 2017. So
Mm-hmm.
she contacted me, and I'm moving up here, but she contacted me and said, "Hey, I need someone. Do you know anyone in Philly that can cover this Malcolm Jenkins story?" And at the time, Malcolm Jenkins was with the Eagles,
Yep.
and he was on a panel discussion, and this is also the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement too. So he was on a panel discussing Black Lives Matter, and she just needed someone to cover it. And this is like very early stages of Black Lives Matter. And I'm sitting here, I'm calling up other people, other journalists that I know, and say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody would pick up the phone. I couldn't get in touch with anyone. So then something hit me in the head, knocked me on the head, figuratively, of course, and said, "You know what? Why don't you take a crack at it?" And maybe that was God speaking to me. I don't know, but why don't you take a crack at it? Why don't you try to see if you can just write this story? And it wasn't a lot, it was just a summary of the event, what Malcolm Jenkins was saying, what he was thinking, interviewing, and I'm going down there scared to death. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my mid 40s at the time, so
Yeah.
and I said, okay, this is a possible shift, not thinking long term, but I said, okay, let's see if I can pull this off. And Malcolm was great. The people there were great at Temple University, and I was able to get the story done. 24 hours later, I was doing stories for the Undefeated, and I was able to do a handful of stories for them, um, from Malcolm Jenkins to Kevin Hart to my childhood idol, Dr. J, which I could have never imagined. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there, um, 9 months later, and I'm sitting face to face with Julius Erving. And that
Wow.
was it was a surreal moment for me, knowing that I had a job to do. It was a sit down interview, and I had to go through so many channels to get that interview with him. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story about the backstory about it. About the big three, the basketball league, basketball tournament, that jumps around every year through different
Mm-hmm.
cities, Ice Cube's thing. Um, Dr. J is one of the coaches there. So one year they were here in Philadelphia. One of the stops is Philadelphia. So my job was to go there and stick around for the post game press conference and get some quotes from Dr. J and do the story from there. Right? So it was sort of like a "Where are you now? Where are they now?" type story. So I get there, and of course Allen Iverson, he's there too because I think he was one of the coaches at the time. And we're all there, all this media from around the country, knowing that it's Iverson, Dr. J, and so many other NBA greats, Clyde Drexler, all those guys, Gary Payton, all those guys. So we're sitting near the press conference, and we're just waiting for after each game. And they were the last game because they were coaching against each other. So it's about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and then someone comes in and says, "Okay, that's it, no more press conference." And I'm like, what in the world, man? What am I going to do? So I had to call up my editor and just say, she said, work with your people, work with his people, see what you can do. But they were very gracious. And this is a kind of like a testimony, Brian, as far as just being persistent in this business. Not only being persistent, but, showing patience and perseverance, I should say. And they got back to me and they say, listen, he has an annual golf tournament and gala later on, and this is June of that year. And then he has a gala in September. He said, one of his people said, um, come back to us then. We'll set you up. We'll give you a one on one. We'll give you an
Mm-hmm.
exclusive. So
Oh
it's like,
wow.
great. So, I looked up instead of just, say, oh man, I'm not cut out for this, or you know, I was mad at Big Three for how they handled it and everything, but it was cool. And then got to the gala that evening. I was able to sit down with him again. I'm still nervous as hell because it's Dr. J. I mean, you think about your favorite athlete of all time,
Mm-hmm.
or your childhood idol that you just grew up watching and you wanted to just maybe shake his hand or wear his shoes or something like that. So this is all just going through my mind. But I got through the interview. I stayed focused. Again, that's another testimony. And it was one of the best interviews I ever had. And it was even more fun because I got to crash his party a little bit before they kicked me out. But I don't kind of publicize this, but it was just a great day, a great night, and that kind of, I don't want to say I'm on a map per se, but that kind of put me to where I arrived. And then, a couple years after that, I kind of got away from writing a little bit, kind of lost my love for writing because writing is tough.
Mm-hmm.
It may come easy to some people, but for me, it was tough
Okay.
because I was both weighing my first love, which is radio, and then writing. And then I was just kind of weighing that shift. And then fast forward to a couple years ago, you were kind of in the, I want to say, kind of like in the post core of the pandemic. Um, I was still thinking about, okay, do I want to write? Do I want to be on the radio? So, and some people do both, by the way. But one of the editors here at the Philadelphia Tribune, she reached out to me and she said, I love what you do. Why don't you come write for us? And even though, Philadelphia Tribune is one of the oldest um, black newspapers that's still publishing in the country, I think it is the oldest. So it goes back to the 1800s. So, um, that was a thrill for me because I grew up reading that paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I just did a number of stories, and I wasn't even a sports writer for them at that point. I was just doing just about every story that they would give me, and that kind of brought me back to um, wanting to say, "Hey, I'm in this business. I want to stay in this business. I want to keep going." And still, within that time, I'm still trying to keep my relationships with people like the Eagles or people like the um, Sixers, Flyers, even college. So I'm still just trying to keep my feet wet and everything with different events and all. And, it's tough to get into the door if you don't have a certain status or there's not a name um, that you can tie yourself to. And, I just kept knocking on the door, knocking on the door. And what I would say is the pinnacle for this past year, this past season, ironically, I guess it's a good luck charm from my standpoint, Eagles are the Super Bowl, right? This
Mm-hmm.
was my first full year of fully covering the Eagles. And
Wow.
the pinnacle of that is getting in the press box. So if you're a
Mm-hmm.
writer, you want to be in the press box because that's where all the action is. That's where you get all the information, gives you access to the locker room. And, I was still a couple years before this, I was still just trying to get myself into just training camp, to
Mm-hmm.
just cover training camp, which was difficult too because it's very strict. And it seems like the bigger the market, the tougher it is to break through. And
Yeah.
Philadelphia is still the fourth largest market in the country. And as opposed to, let's say, I would even say, I guess Kansas City is a little bigger market, but just for instance, you might have maybe a dozen writers in Kansas City who cover the team on a regular. Philadelphia might be 50.
Mm-hmm.
So for all publications, and this is Philadelphia is um, a regional markets where you have South Jersey, New Jersey, Delaware, and you know Pennsylvania has a heavy Philadelphia has a heavy metro area which goes out into the Pennsylvania suburbs. If you ever heard of Poconos, different things
Yep.
like that, even out to Dutch country. So they all cover Philadelphia sports. So they have people from all over that cover the team. So just trying to step in there, and then you put in the race aspect. Being a black man. Just stepping into there because the industry is still white male dominated, no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
even when I still step into those circles, you're trying to. I'm not trying to prove myself to them, but I'm just trying to navigate through this space through all these white people and saying that okay, I'm coming from a black paper. Sometimes, I'm not even I'm gonna keep it 100. Sometimes it's um, what do you call it? It's It's the imposter syndrome, and not so
Hmm.
much being amongst them, but it's imposter syndrome that I've waited so long to
Yeah.
get into these circles. You kind of Your mind almost plays tricks with you and saying that, okay, do you belong here? But,
Mm.
when I look back on how far I've come, when I look back at my journey, paying my dues, all those things that, you feel like you belong, you're here, and you feel like you're here to stay, and you just keep grinding from there.
What up? It's your boy Blue Magic, owner of For Your Wear and one half of the Mixed Tag Show. Now, I know you've seen the announcements from some of your favorite podcasters and wrestlers. I've decided to expand my business to become a vendor so that people from the wrestling community have a better way to communicate with some of their favorites. So check out foryourwear.com and see if your favorite podcaster or wrestler has partnered up with me. If not, let them know that they should. Also, if you're looking for a vendor for your merchandise, reach out to me at Blue Magic Grind, spell how it sound on Twitter or Instagram, or at For Your Wear, FORURWEAR, on Twitter and on Instagram. Shout out to Brian H. Waters and Breaking Through Glass Ceilings. Their merchandise are already up, and they're one of the first one that supported, so go support them. All right? Peace.
Wow, man. That's amazing. One of the things that you touched on
Mhm.
was the broadcasting school. And the reason why I
Yes.
say that's important because I'm gonna share a story. When I was 22,
Mhm.
I was 20 when I graduated from community college. And I was supposed to take a 1-year break. Ended up being a 3-year break. And during that
That happens
time,
to all of us, yeah.
yeah, man. And during that time, I had considered going to. We have one in Baltimore as a Maryland School of Broadcasting,
Mhm.
and I had considered it, but I did end up going to Morgan State. But to hear your testimony about going to that school and to see where you at, I think is an amazing feat. Um, and you mentioned like just getting to meet Dr. J. I gotta ask you, um, when you
Yes.
met your hero, was you? It sounds like you wasn't disappointed. What was the highlight, and what was
Mhm.
something that you left with after? Like, what did he leave you with? Any personal gems after that interview and your interactions with him?
That's an excellent question because again, I wasn't disappointed at all. I was
Hmm.
pleasantly surprised because, I'm this, Dr. J has talked to a million reporters in his life, right?
Hmm.
So I'm just coming up and I'm trying to get a story. He don't know me from a can of paint, even though I grew up watching him and everything. So, and first thing is, what you can't do, even though it's extremely difficult, what you can do is just get caught up. You
Yep.
can't get caught up in the mystique, but there's a mystique to Dr. J. There's a mystique
Hmm.
to Julius Erving, and we all can imagine it, and it's
Yeah.
still there. It was there when he was a player for the Sixers, there when he was playing for the Nets, and it's just still there. And dude is just still the coolest cat on the planet. Still is. I guess he's
Hmm.
about age 70 now, or in his early 70s. Still the coolest cat on the planet. And one of the things was he was just consistent in what he does, and he's just smooth, and he really didn't give me any gems, but he just really just uh, gave me everything that I needed. Every question
Okay.
that I asked, he answered it. He answered it. It was no pushback, even though his people was all around,
Yeah.
just trying to like peek in and make sure that I wasn't doing anything off the cuff.
Hmm.
He was excellent. And I was able to get a photo with him, which is kind of broke the rules there, but it's Dr. J, right? But
Yeah.
um, yeah, but it was a surreal moment, and I often I won't say warn is the right word, but I also often caution other journalists or young journalists coming up that you have to kind of keep the subject in perspective because
Hmm.
sometimes they will disappoint you.
Yeah.
Um, for me, for the most part, athletes have been pretty good.
Hmm.
But it's when I've kind of rubbed shoulders with celebrities and like interviewing them, it's
Yeah.
just a little more difficult because they're just most of them just aren't that interesting.
Hmm.
when you
Facts.
when they're not behind the camera, when they're not in front of the camera, or they're not in the news or something like that, or They're not on stage. Most of them aren't that interesting. Athletes are, and you're also, um, you know, it's also harder to be more creative with them. And I'll give you another example, Brian. At that party, it was it was athletes galore there.
Mm-hmm.
Celebrities too, because I remember he and Eddie Levert are the OJs. They're like really tight because I guess they were around the same age and they're very tight. Jeffrey Osborne was there, um, Marcus Allen, Alonzo Mourning. You name Hall of Fame athletes, quite a few of them were there, and also Reggie Jackson, right?
Yeah.
Hall of Fame baseball player Reggie Jackson. He was there, so already had a idea. He had a reputation of being difficult or blowing people off, right?
Okay.
You come up to him, but here's what I had in my back pocket. Reggie Jackson's from this area. He went to a local high school here outside of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of slick with it, and I went up to him. I said, "Oh man, it's Reggie Jackson." I said, "What am I going to ask him?" And thankfully, sometimes I get a brain lock. But I thought about it and I said, what am I going to ask him? Because again, Utah's a Hall of Fame player. They've had 50 million questions about the same old thing. Ask him about the Yankees, the A's, maybe even the year he spent in Baltimore, whatever. But
Right.
I'm going to ask him about his old high school. And I said, Reggie, um, did you go to the old high school building or the new one?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me. He was like a bewildered looks. Like, how did he know to ask that? That was his reaction to me.
Exactly.
And he kind of gave a little smile, a little smirk. He said, "Oh yeah, I went to the new building."
Mm-hmm.
And he seems he didn't vocalize it, but his whole demeanor was so intrigued that I asked him that question from his old neighborhood, his old
Yeah.
high school, and everything. And again, that's probably a question that he rarely gets. And I was quote unquote off the clock then, so I got a photo with him too, because
Nice.
me being a Gen X guy, growing up watching Reggie. I'm old enough to remember his candy bar, so
Yeah.
but that's just little tidbits, little tricks of the trade that I like to share. But going back to your original point with Dr. J and everything, you kind of got to feel these people out. You got to
Mm-hmm.
feel athletes out, feel celebrities out, and everything. Because some of them are going to be difficult, but you have to use your training, you have to use your experience to kind of get around that and just get what you need for the story. Because at the end of the day, you're working.
Yeah, man. Just like listening to this, I know a lot of people listening gonna be able to take away a lot from
Thank you,
everything you said,
thank you.
man. I gotta ask you this. Recently, you just
Mhm.
won an industry award to and now like I was obviously happy when I saw it come through the timeline and
Thank you,
on
appreciate it.
Twitter,
Yes,
so congratulations. But
thanks.
now hearing more in depth of your journey going the non-traditional route, going through the
hmm
internet radio route, it's very very similar to what I've done. um what did that mean, that moment when you found out you won?
Um, it was hard to put it in perspective. It
Mhm.
was hard it was hard to like kind of let it sink in. It has sunk in now, but naturally it just thought back to all my hard work, all the grinding, and also another full disclosure moment. I thought of quitting
Mhm.
a number of times. Like I'm not cut out for this. Um, you know, and a big part of it is money. A big part of it is trying to find your way and get and make it a career or make it maybe a semi career.
Mhm.
And when things aren't going the way that you think they are, especially when you feel like you've paid your dues or you feel like you've worked really hard, you sacrifice time, even sometimes some of your own money. Um, it all came to um, it all came to fruition for me that what I'm doing is worth it. And for the most part, though, it's not even the award. It's just everyday people just coming to me when I write a story. It's just people coming to me and say, "Hey, I read your story. I love your work. I love how you wrote that story." And even, I do sports for the most part, but I just wrote a story about a local filmmaker she's uh, doing a documentary on the gun violence here in Philadelphia, which I know just about every city can resonate with, can, relate to. And one of the producers of that documentary, he inboxed me. He said, "Hey, man," he said, "I love how you did that story because, there's been a handful of stories done on the same documentary, but the one thing he told me that stood out, and he said, it wasn't your regular run of the mill industry story.
Mm-hmm.
Because most times when you're reviewing a film,
Mm-hmm.
it's just maybe it becomes very vanilla, very generic, and it's just on to the next one. It has no core. It has no heart or passion to it. It has no
Right.
body to the story. And when I told Kyra Knox is her name, and when I told her that, when I asked her I wanted to interview her for the story, which she was very gracious, I said, "I know you have this documentary, but I want our readers to learn about you, the person, your journey, where you came from." And she's actually a filmmaker who came from the non-traditional route. Even though she went to a performing arts school, even she grew up in she went through a theater program as a child. She had got away from it, and she's not um, she wasn't a person who went the traditional route as far as um, the people who go to the UCLA's and USC's of the world, for
Mm-hmm.
filmmaking. So I wanted to capture that story. And, the award is just um, it's just a testimony of those stories that I do. It's a testimony of the people that come to me or maybe inbox me or um, contact me and say, "Hey, I love how you did that story, man. I love how you covering the Eagles."
Yeah.
Um, because again, in a white male dominated sports industry, and we all play around on Twitter every now and then and everything. And I know with you being a big
Absolutely.
wrestling guy, big sports guy, and everything, we all it's about the culture. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when you go into the locker room or you go on the field and you interview these guys, of course, you have to do your homework and do your research and everything, but it's different. I'm gonna be real with you. It's different, and you know this for the
Yeah,
most
I've been
part.
there.
It's different, than suburban white guy interviewing Jalen Hurts is going to be different than me or you interviewing Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite play, actually, my favorite player to interview on the Eagles is Devontae Smith. Heisman Trophy winner out of Alabama,
Yep.
and
He didn't do
he's
me
so
well
cut.
in fantasy though. Not in the beginning of the year.
Well,
That's
it's the adjustment with
I
AJ
know,
Brown and
right?
everything, but he kind of came on, and he actually
By the
he
time
actually
I
set
was out of it.
he actually set the franchise record for receptions, by the way. But
Yeah, I saw.
anyway,
Mhm.
um, but I know that don't help that much with fantasy. But
That's why I
uh,
don't bet though. That's exactly the reason why I don't do
there
paid
you
league.
go. There you go. But he turned out to be one of my favorites because he's always been gracious.
Mm.
Again, you got plenty of cameras in your face and microphones and everything, but he's been gracious, keeps it 100, all those things. So you just kind of know. And here's even another story, and this was last year, Jalen's first year as a starter. And after the game, he wore purple this week, but he wore a purple suit after one of the games last week. And you know, all the mainstream media was first thing they think about is Prince because that's all
Yep,
they know when it comes to purple, right?
exactly.
But none of them noticed he had a vest on. He had a suit vest on, and none of them noticed the the Omega symbol
Mm-hmm.
on the back of his vest. So it took one reporter, because it's only a handful of us here. It took one black reporter here. What's his name? E.J. Smith, who works for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he mentioned Jalen Hurts has on his Omega, his Omega Phi Psi vest, and I piggybacked on that, and I tweeted above EJ, and I said, "Representation matters,"
Mm-hmm.
because everybody else in that room would have missed it, and that's the
Absolutely.
difference. That's the difference. You have to recognize Divine Nine, right? Even if you're not,
Mm.
a frat
Affiliated.
brother, or you're
Yeah.
not affiliated, right? So that's the difference. Um, and even so, even when he wore purple, the NFC Championship game and everything, I said, "Hey, the Q Dog has arrived." So that's a little thing, little nuggets, and that's the cool thing about social media too, because us, the culture, we can get together.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we beef and everything, hopefully all the time it's all in fun, and it's all in black joy, black fun, black comedy, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of difference that I want to make, and I want to get it from our perspective, from where we from. If I'm doing a local story like Hassan Reddick, he's from Camden, New Jersey, which is just over the bridge here in Philadelphia. I want to
Mm-hmm.
capture that. I want to represent the people from Camden. I want to represent the people from West Philly, where I'm from. I want to accentuate that. And as you know, I did a story on Shirley Ralph. It was a spare
Mm-hmm.
the moment thing. I wasn't even supposed to be there, but her winning an Emmy Award, and I wanted to, I wanted to capture all of that.
Yeah.
Her husband being here from Philadelphia, who is a local politician, Abbott Elementary, which takes place in Philadelphia. Her being a Delta, all those things. That's all about the culture where, if it was done by a mainstream publication, you don't get those nuggets. You don't get the culture part of it.
Mm-hmm.
As Denzel said, I forget where that clip is from. He said somebody asked him a question. He just answered culture. That was one, culture.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's kind of how I go about my work. That's kind of how I go about my journey, because we've been deprived so long as covering our athletes, covering our celebrities, even
Yeah.
covering our everyday um, our everyday heroes, or our everyday people in the community that are doing great stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make our environment, trying to make our neighborhoods better, trying to make our cities better. And you have to capture that.
Now, when you look back at everything, to be able to
Mhm.
do this in Philly, you brought up the fact top four or top five market, number four. Um, Also going the non-traditional route. What kind of advice would you give to somebody if they was taking a similar path? Because you could make you could say, all right, you mentioned Kansas City earlier. We'll use them, even though it's not a lower level market. It's still, trying to break in, get into the like mainstream sports with,
Mhm.
the Chiefs or the Royals. But it's still a big deal, right? It's still still a market that might be a little easier to get into if you're going the non-traditional way. And I know you
Right.
mentioned there was times you wanted to give up, but what kind of advice would you give to somebody who would be following a similar path as you?
Well, first thing is, I don't deter anybody from going to college and
Mhm.
getting a degree in communications or journalism. I don't deter that at all. I'm all for it. If you're at that age, and that's what you aspire to be. That's my first advice. My second advice, before I even get to the non-traditional route, my second advice is, once you get out of college, or once you get that degree, or once you decide you want to step into this industry, if you're still young, you don't have any obligations, you're without children, even though it can be done as well that way. I'll say, Go to another market if you can. Explore other markets, explore other parts of the country, and just try to do your thing, get your feet wet. If you
Yeah.
have to go to, you know, small town on the Eastern Shore in Maryland, go do that. You know, if you have to go in the deep South and Mississippi or somewhere like that to kind of get your feet wet, do so, because you can always come back home to where you are. And I've seen tons of journalists where they've gone all around and they find their way back home.
Yeah.
Because you can always come home, whether you stay in the industry or you don't. Well,
Mhm.
and as far as a non-traditional route, couple things. Be serious. Be serious about what you do, because in the beginning, people are not going to take you serious, because if they don't see, if your credentials aren't visible, and when I say
Mhm.
your credentials aren't there, when I say not visible, they may see that you don't have a degree yet or a degree at all, different things of that nature. Be serious, be on your grind, and the number one thing is be consistent. When you start to interact with some of these teams, uh, PR people, even if you're just starting out covering high school. And I forgot to say that before I even got into internet radio and all those things, I was a reporter for a semi-pro football team here in
Okay.
Philadelphia, and it was actually I would say run, but it was actually funded through Patti LaBelle, the legendary R&B
Mhm.
singer. But I was a sideline reporter and a PA announcer for semi-pro team. I got my feet wet with that. I didn't like it necessarily, but they were probably the only people that were open up. Say, hey, we need somebody. Let's do it. I didn't know what I was doing necessarily, but I just say be consistent with whatever you do, whether it's a podcast, whether you're writing a blog. Be consistent, be accurate as well, and be truthful. Don't just do it to just make a name of yourself. Do it because you love the craft, you love the profession, you want to get into the profession, because the industry can spot a phony from a mile away.
Mhm. What does it
And
mean? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
and let's say stay consistent, be truthful, and just keep it 100, because all you have is your name and your reputation, especially when you're building your name. You don't want any of that tarnished, because that can be, you know. And again, if you get to social media with the age of social media,
Yep.
and people call you out, you're done. So
No, those are true facts. Um, what does it mean for you personally to be covering the Eagles Super Bowl run? Now, and granted, you they always say you can't be biased, right? You gotta be, and
yes,
then granted, it's different when you're a hometown reporter.
no cheering in the
No
press box,
cheering in the press box. See, and you know
which
what?
is true, by the way. But
Well, here's the thing. So we was talking about this on I do the show TWG Fan Club. Shout out to Queen PR, Justin, and Ciendol. And me and Queen PR was at the Royal Rumble, and we was in the press box. And it's totally different in wrestling than it is
I can
in
imagine.
sports, because everybody's a wrestling
Oh,
fan.
I have to do that one day.
Yeah. And so so I didn't stay in the press box to watch the Royal Rumble. I actually was in the crowd, except during the main event. But you saw
Mhm.
people go, so it's different in pro wrestling than it is in sports. But
Right.
how do you contain NFC Championship game? Come on now. I know
I
it,
was
it there's got to be a breaking point, and I'm glad you're on here.
I I was
That's what it
I was cautiously optimistic. I thought they would win. That's okay. They got to win. But I was cautiously optimistic,
Mhm.
and it's so funny because as much as you try to contain yourself, you're
Mhm.
going to have some body English. You know, you're
Yeah.
going to have some of that. We can get away with a couple oohs and ahs,
Yeah.
or something like what was it? The catch Devontae Smith had early in the game, which really wasn't a catch, but Shanahan didn't challenge it. It's like, oh man, did he catch that? And he's like, oh, did he catch? Little things like that you kind of get away with. But I'm like, once they won, I'm taking it all in.
Yeah.
I'm taking it all in, and I'm thinking back to 2017 when they won their first Super Bowl, and I'm like, not anything can top that, but just being there, being present in it's kind of cool. And actually, unless you're really far removed and say you came here as a reporter or sports journalist, and you're from
You're
Colorado,
assigned.
no. Yeah, I don't even want to say Colorado. Say somewhere remotely that doesn't have a team where there's no
South
way you could be
Dakota.
affiliated. Yeah, South Dakota. You're coming here to, and you made your way here to Philadelphia to become a journalist because it was a good job, right? And it was a promotion. Unless you're that, if you spend any time in a market covering a team, you're going to have some type of bias because the time that you spend with players, time that you spend with coaches, some of them you can't help but like and I would say just root for.
Yeah.
And like with the natives, it's actually quite a few of us who are natives who cover the team. But they're all and talk show hosts and everything. They're the biggest fans.
Yeah.
You talk about any city, they're just glorified fans who just have a microphone. Don't let them tell you otherwise. It's, oh yeah, we got to be ejected more here and everything. And
I
they
get
give it
that
away all
part.
the time. Yeah, they
Because
give it away all the time.
I'm watching and I'm thinking like all my friends in the press box, and I'm like, all right, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know if I would have been, the Orioles are my favorite team out of all sports. If I would have been in the press box during the Delmon double, there's no way I'm containing myself. Delmon Young hits, they trailing
Yeah,
all
I remember.
most of the
Yep.
game.
Yep.
I still have that moment on my phone. I was working at ESPN at the time as a production assistant, and I was off. I was working on a Mike and Mike show, so I went home for work, and
Nice.
I had a bet with a buddy of mine, and he wasn't a Detroit fan, but he said, "All right, y'all not winning the series." I said, "Yeah, we are." He said, "All right, donuts, whoever," and I said, and then to sweep them that Monday morning, he came in with donuts, but. There you could show bias at ESPN because you're in the screening area. So, like, if you're working on
Right. Yeah,
producing
you
stuff,
can
you
get
could
away
show.
with it. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm like, come on now. I'm like,
Yeah.
for instance, Bryce Harper hits a game-winning home run. Yeah, there's got to be some cheer now.
Here's the key. You can't let it show in your work,
Right. Okay.
especially when you're a writer.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have your affiliation. You're a cheer. Listen, when I'm not on, and I used to show my Eagles, Phillies, Sixers stuff all the time before I became a regular journalist. And I still work full time, by the way. So that's another thing. So don't be afraid to kind of balance the two. If your full time job pays the bills and everything, keep it, man. Keep that roof over your head. That's another thing. But anyway, you can't help it. And when I'm off social media or I'm not working and everything, I go in the supermarket. I got my Randall Cunningham jersey on, man. I got my Brian Dawkins jersey on. I got
Every
my
Eagle his favorite.
yeah.
And
He's like Dawkins could get arrested here, and we'd all bail him out.
yeah, I met him when he was working on NFL Live. And I
Okay, yeah, I remember that.
remember, and like before I started working on that show briefly, I saw like Eagles fans in different areas of the campus, and they would have like their Dawkins jersey or poster at their desk. And
Oh
people
yeah.
say, "Well, has he ever came over here?" It's like, "Nah, but that would be a moment." And I remember when I met him, the first day he was like, I said, "How you doing? I'm Brian." He said, "How you spell it?" He said, "I-O-Y." I said, "With an I." He said, "That's the only way to spell it." And it was just like,
That sound like him. I never
yeah.
got a chance to interview him, but I've been close enough and known him enough as a player and
Yeah.
everything like that. So yeah, that sounds just like him.
He's
But yeah, you can't help it, man.
yeah. Well,
It's
I'm rooting
and
for
it's where you're
y'all.
from, and yes, and it's where you're from, man.
Yeah.
Just just like you, being a Baltimore fan and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Baltimore, by the way. It's like it's almost like a section of Philly, and I know it's a much smaller city, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like one of our neighborhoods or sections and everything, like a branch off.
We the
And
forgotten city in between Philly and DC.
right, yeah, I love. In fact, my fiance and I sometimes we'll drive down there just to hang out at the
Mm-hmm.
harbor or eat or something like that. So, and another full disclosure, if I wasn't a Philly fan, I'd probably be a Baltimore sports fan. So,
Nice, nice.
um, but yeah, it's just y'all like brothers to me.
There we go.
Y'all
There
like
we go.
brothers and sisters to me. But yeah, but as far as the fandom and everything,
Mm-hmm.
you can balance it and everything, but again, as long as it doesn't show on your work, as long as the
Yeah.
show doesn't show on my my writing and everything, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I pull hard for Jalen Hurts, man.
Yeah.
I pull
That
hard for him.
that's how I'm for Lamar Jackson. And I've
Yeah,
said this before. If the Ravens let him slip away, I'm gone.
yeah,
Because
and
it's
as you should
culture.
be.
Like
Yeah,
we talked about culture.
as you should. And
Mm-hmm.
we most people have come around to Jalen Hurts and everything, but his first year, mind you, he was 9-8 last year and took it to the playoffs, which nobody thought would
Yep.
happen. And everybody just thought he was going to be a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
But because the vitriol, the bias, in the reporting and the writing and everything, that all that motivates me to be in this business because I want to try to balance it out. I want to try to give
Mm-hmm.
it a different perspective, a fair perspective,
Yep.
because it makes no sense that um, and I'll just take the NBA and the NFL that you're looking at 70%, 80% of the workforce is African American, but you don't even have in most places double digit percentage of black people who cover them, and that's men and women, by the way, equally.
Mm-hmm.
And even like, there's no black women who cover the Eagles right now, who really cover Philly sports here at the moment. Well, I'll let her announce it because I think one of our friends, one of our buddies, just got into the fray here in
Mm.
Philadelphia. But
Yep. I know exactly what you're
um,
talking about.
yeah, so yeah,
That's
so
exciting.
and yay for that because it's long freaking overdue, man, long freaking
Facts.
overdue. But I just want to be a part of that who um, changes the culture, shifts the culture, and what are we 13-14% of the US population. you
Mm-hmm.
know we're not even that in these media circles. In most part, we're not even that. It's still in double digits most places. And
Yeah.
again, you got 80%, 70% in these leagues that look like us. You throw the WNBA in there as well. So, and there's still very few of us, reporting and saying stories because some of us are, some of the best football players are from the big city. There's football players that come from Baltimore, the DMV, football players that come from Philadelphia, even down in the deep South where DeMonte Smith and AJ Brown is,
Mm-hmm.
Texas, where Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes is, and everything. You still don't have enough people who have been around them, who have covered them, and who are covering them on the mainstream and mass media. That has to change. And I, I never really looked at myself this way, but I guess in a way, I am sort of like an agent of change, or want to be an agent of change.
There you go, man. But before we get out of here, I gotta ask you this question, man. When you look back at your career and
Mhm.
everything that you've done, when was the moment that you broke through the glass ceiling?
I'll say just this year again. I always try to level and just say my journey is still ongoing. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say this year, just finally getting into the press box
Yeah.
at the Eagles games at Lincoln Financial Field, just stepping in there. And I actually worked for the team for their game day staff, so that was another thing that inspired me. Just as far as seeing everything behind the scenes and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And this is why I was still weighing, what I wanted to do. I still want to be in media and journalism and everything, and that kind of motivated me too. But yeah, just kind of stepping in there, just personally. I didn't make a huge deal out of it. on social media, and I kind of put on Twitter, say, hey, first, I'm covering my first game and everything. And I do that so much for other people.
Yeah.
And, kind of like with your platform here, trying to like, inspire people like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too. Just
Mm-hmm.
keep pushing and everything. I'm here, you know, shy black kid from West Philly and everything. I kind of made it to this point. So that's what I want to aspire to. And I've gotten so much. I've gotten so much praise and I've gotten so much encouragement. Say, hey man, you're doing your thing in there. We glad to have you in there.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of stuff can get jaded if there's not enough people who look like us covering these athletes and so forth.
Absolutely. OJ, man, I appreciate you. I know, like I said, I know you got a busy schedule. Congratulations on the Super Bowl. I know you're not playing, but I was like, go win that thing. But
Well, you talk
I
to anybody in the city, we all playing.
rooting for y'all. Would love to see, can't wait to hear the stories when, covering it and the parades. Be safe out there, brother. Appreciate you.
I certainly will. I certainly will. Thanks so much, Brian. Thank you for this platform. And it was a pleasure being on with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let the people know where they can find you.
Yes, so you can always find me on my Twitter page. I'm on there a lot, maybe too much, but OJ Philly. And you can also find my work at phillytrib.com. Or you can just Google the Philadelphia Tribune and you can just get to their website. You can see all my different stories. Also, I have a Facebook page, a fan page, OJ Spivey _journalist. I post all my stories on there as well. So if you can't find on the Trib, you can always go on Facebook and find them there too.
There you go. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure y'all follow OJ. Definitely stay tuned to everything that he's doing through the Super Bowl and beyond. Until the next time, folks, remember, do not let anybody place a ceiling above your success. So long, everybody. Thank you for listening to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. You can support this podcast by going on foryourwear.com. Go to personalities and see Brian H. Waters. There you can get Breaking Through Glass Ceilings t-shirt or a hoodie, as well as a No Ceilings Above Success t-shirt. Go to foryourwear.com. Make sure you also check out some of the other podcasters and professional wrestlers as well.